Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, bringing you Everything Co-op. The National Co-op Bank sponsors this program so that you can get the benefits of cooperatives around the world, particularly here, though, in the United States. And we've had a number of different people on the program in this past year. We started last year in October. October is Co-op month. And to celebrate co-ops and to let people understand about co-ops, we are bringing you this program so you can find out about how co-ops can possibly benefit you and benefit people in your community. There's a lot of different kinds of web pages you can go to get information about co-ops. Credit unions are co-ops, is one form of co-ops. Credit unions, in the past, has been very hard to get into, or you might have to belong to an organization, and that cooperative would be a part of the organization. But if you want to join a credit union, which you could go to www.asmarterchoice.org. That's www.asmarterchoice.org. If you wanted to learn about credit unions here in the U.S., which is one great financial institution that you could go to. But today we're going to talk about co-ops around the world. And we have Dame Pauline Green on the line with us this morning. She's the president of ICA, International Cooperative Alliance. Good morning, Pauline. Dame
Good morning. Good morning. Pauline's fine, thank you.
Okay. I'm so glad that you took time out. I understand you're in Quebec this morning at your conference.
Yes, I am, and it's been an absolutely fantastic conference here in Quebec City. 3,000 people from all over the world talking about the value of cooperatives and talking about business challenges that we face and how we will deal with them in the coming years.
You know, this audience that is on this radio program, for the most part, are African American, and they don't know a lot about co-ops. It hasn't been something that's been a lot in our culture and our training. So I wanted you to talk to us about what's happening around the world. And I heard you speak last year, matter of fact, at the beginning of this year, and you said that there are 1 billion people in co-ops around the world. Is that true?
That's right. There's 1 billion people who have joined a cooperative around the world. And the United Nations has been very clear that half the world's population relies on a cooperative in one way or another to maintain their living standards. In effect, the cooperative movement is firstly very large, big business, scalable business. The small little co-ops of 200 years ago have grown to very big businesses. But they're the minority in terms of numbers, because the vast majority of cooperatives are small and medium-sized cooperatives that are operating all across the world. You'll find them in every village, town, city across the world. Huge scope, huge depth. And in fact, often they are the backbone of what's called the real economy at grassroots level in many, many countries across the world. So it's a multitude of small and medium-sized businesses, democratic businesses, owned by local people, formed usually when people find a need in their own society, and they fill it by coming together as a community or a group of friends or a group of colleagues to look after a need that is not fulfilled for them at the moment. So if you don't have a small consumer shop in your village, you could come together as villagers. You could add little bit of investment, and you can develop a small shop that provides staple goods in many parts of the world. Or you can join together to build your houses together, cooperatively owned, built by you together. We're doing a very good initiative like that in Haiti now after the terrible earthquake there was there. And they're very sustainable, earthquake-proofed houses being built by the Haitians themselves, 24 families building their cooperative houses together. So, these sort of initiatives, and it can be in any sector. It can be banking, insurance, it can be pharmacy, it can be energy, it can be health, housing, anything. This is what people are using all over the world to get a better life for them, their families, their communities.
With 1 billion people in co-ops, and the world is right now at about 7 billion. That's 14.3% of the world population. But
it's pretty
co-ops.
Good.
And then you say that they sort of impact 50% of the world population.
Yeah. In fact, I think we're the second biggest, if you like, member organization, just slightly smaller than the Catholic Church. So we're pretty impressive across the world.
And speaking of the Catholic Church, I saw you with a picture with the Pope.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What happened was that Pope Francis worked very closely with the co-op movement when he was a cardinal and an archbishop in Buenos Aires, in the shanty towns with the poor, helping to create cooperatives to help people take themselves out of poverty. So he knew the cooperative movement, and he invited the cooperative movement to visit him when he became Pope to discuss how we can put the human being back into the global economy. It was a very moving and very interesting experience for all of us, actually.
I would have loved to have been on the wall or a part of that conversation. I'm really impressed with him, and I'm also very impressed with what you're doing. How long have you been the president of the International Cooperative Alliance?
Well, I was elected in 2009, but, if it wasn't me, it would be somebody else doing this job, because the thing about the co-op movement is it's a way in which ordinary folk take leadership in their own communities, and slowly, if you go through the cooperative movement, you can end up doing this job. So I'm just somebody who's done just that, and there are lots of other. I have the distinction, and I'm very privileged to be the first woman president. But I can tell you this: sure as heck, I'm not going to be the last. There are so many good, competent women that I've met all over the world who've been so excited that a woman has finally made it to the leadership of the International Cooperative Alliance, even though it's taken us 120 years, because women have had equal rights in the co-op movement since it was developed and since the 7 principles were born in 1844. And it's taken us all this time to get a woman leader in the global body. But as I say, I'm absolutely confident there's going to be many more.
You've touched on a lot of things, the reasons that I love co-ops and become very passionate about them, even though I was not taught that when I went to the MBA program through Stanford. At nowhere in my education did I hear about co-ops. But that's ordinary people, and this is what that I have loved about it, is working with ordinary people and watching them get the education they need to make good decisions in their life and in their communities. It's fascinating.
Well, you're right, Vernon, and I reckon this is the single most powerful and successful initiative to take people out of poverty with dignity by giving them the tools to create a business that they can build themselves and give their families a future. It's the single most successful initiative ever, I think, for taking people out of poverty. We've taken millions out of poverty across the world in the last 200 years. It's not acknowledged because cooperatives are local businesses. They have local boards. They're controlled by local people for local people. And as a result, they don't get the recognition of a Microsoft or a Google or a Nike, but they're a huge, powerful contributor to many people's livelihoods, particularly during the last 5 years of the crisis, when cooperatives have continued to grow as people have thought, heck, there has to be a different way of doing business, and they've rediscovered cooperatives.
When we go back to 14.3% of the population in the world is in co-ops, I don't get a sense that in the U.S. is that many. So where's the largest concentration of co-ops?
The largest cooperative in the world by number of cooperatives is India, with 600,000 primary cooperatives. And for instance, we have 2 huge cooperatives from India here. One is called Amul, and some people may know Amul if they've been to India, because it's the best known and best trusted brand, beating Nestle and all these other businesses into a cocked hat, frankly, in a recent survey of the Indian population. It's a dairy co-op, but it's owned by something like like 70 million basic peasant farmers across India, many of them women whose husbands are off working in the towns.
You said 70 million?
The figures are unimaginable, I know, but that's the reality. And the other one is Indian Farmer Fertilizer Cooperative, which was actually started with US aid in the 1960s and now supports 70,000 cooperatives across India and is exporting their technology all around the world. Last year, 2 years ago, they did a $1.2 billion investment with Co-op Federae here in Canada to build a fertilizer plant. So this is an Indian cooperative owned by Indian farmers, and I've had the pleasure of actually speaking to some of the core farmers, just grassroots subsistence farmers, basically, who are working through what's called IFCO, this farming fertilizer cooperative, to, interestingly, as they say it, to save their soil from chemicals. So although they're buying their fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, they're being trained and helped by the fertilizer cooperative to become organic and stop using fertilizers because it's better for the soil. Now, there's a company that's really putting its social and environmental credentials on the line.
That would put them out of business at one point, wouldn't it?
Sure. But they're finding other ways of servicing their farmer needs and helping the farmer to. And these farmers, these very core grassroots farmers, were talking to me about organic digesters and all sorts of things, which I only hear about on radio programs, and they know all about. And that's being fed and helped and supported by the Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative.
Well, we're going to take a break right now. And if anybody out there would like to have a question or comment to myself or Dame Pauline Green, call 1-800-450-7876, 1-800-450-7876, and we'll come back and talk more about the world and the world of cooperatives.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Welcome back. We have Dame Pauline Green. My name is Vernon Oakes. She's on the line talking to us about the world and what's happening with cooperatives around the world. And National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program so that you can understand the benefits of co-ops in your local community or in communities around the world. Speaking of that, Pauline, it looks like if there's co-ops all around the world, and we first met at the United Nations in, I think, October of 2011, where they had the Year of the Co-op, International Year of Cooperatives.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that in Russia and China, in all of Latin America and Africa, you have all of these co-ops. So it looks like co-ops work through all political and economic systems, whether it's communism, democratic, socialist, whatever it is. Do you have any sense why that's so?
Well, look, excuse me, my voice is a bit croaky. There's a lot of talking going on this week. From the perspective of the International Cooperative Alliance, we are talking about cooperatives. So we say to anybody who is in a cooperative in any country in the world, if it conforms to the cooperative law in that country, they are welcome in our tent. So we don't talk geostrategic political issues. We don't talk religion. So all during the Cold War, we had all the NATO countries in the International Cooperative Alliance and all the Warsaw Pact countries, the Soviet countries in. And since the wall the Berlin Wall came down, we've been helping support people from the countries in Russia and the ones that were in the former Soviet bloc to reform their cooperative law to become modern Western modern, I guess, cooperatives with modern law, the sort of law that we would all recognize. Similarly, in religious terms, we've just had an Iranian on our board, we've had an Israeli on our board, and we do not talk about those issues. We talk about growing cooperatives for the benefit of ordinary people in every country. And that's been, as long as the president of the ICA remains firmly committed to not allowing those issues to be discussed within our movement and within our global board, we stick together and talk about cooperatives, share our cooperative stories, learn from each other's cooperatives all around the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating that the main theme that runs through the cooperative, no matter what the background of the people are, what their religious background, political background, whatever their thoughts are what I would suggest are the 7 basic principles of cooperation.
Correct. That's our Bible, if you like, and those are the things that every cooperative in the world aspires to. So if you stick to those issues and how it is that we can grow the family of cooperative businesses around the world, influence politicians of all sorts in order to grow the cooperative family of business, speak to world leaders, whether it's the Pope or the imams or whoever it is, any religious leader who wants to talk about cooperatives, we'll go and talk about them. And Pope Francis, you were referring to him earlier, when we met with him, he said that in 1954 his father had taken himself and his 3 brothers aside, sat them down and talked to them about cooperatives, and he's never forgotten it. And that's why he asked us to go and see him, because he has now got a policy of reintroducing the human being into the global economy. And cooperatives, that's our language. That's what we're about, because cooperatives are people-centered businesses. And it's very easy to see why it can attract everybody, because a company or a corporation, their key objective is to maximize their profitability to give the biggest return to their shareholders. For a cooperative, the key issue and the key obligation is to meet the needs of their members. So immediately you see the difference. One's driven by profit, one's driven by the needs of their members. Now, we do make profits. We have to keep our businesses first class in the marketplace. But we don't have to make profit at the expense of our members' needs.
I say hallelujah, fantastic.
Good man.
Because you are preaching, if you will, telling the story of what.
I am a bit of an evangelist for this cause. You're right.
What makes a co-op so important? And I had on the program, and I want to get you a copy of this one, a gentleman from that was the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, talking about the concept of Ubuntu, Ubuntu, which is, for me, as I told him on the program, is the center of what co-ops are about, because that is saying that I am because we are. I am because you are, and that you are great. Because I am. We are, and he called it humanism. So what you're talking about is right with what this Southern African tradition is, and what he was saying when he was the ambassador to South Africa when Mandela became president for the 3 years that Mandela was president, and he said that's the main concept. This way of being is what caused Mandela to be able to work with his captors, the people that put him in jail for 27 years, because he knew that the humane thing to do was to work together, and that's what co-ops are all about.
Well, I've had the great privilege to meet 2 very extraordinary people in my life. One was Nelson Mandela, and the other was Pope Francis. And those are the sort of people, ordinary guys, doing extraordinary things. Because both of these people are very modest, very moderate people, very calm, very considered, without airs and graces, without any sort of side to them, but really absolutely passionate advocates of the betterment of their people. And I was just blown away by both of them.
Well, your humility may not allow you to accept this, but I see you in the same vein.
Oh, no.
That's the way you started talking. Humble, not I am here because, and anybody can do this job, and I don't necessarily believe that. I don't think anybody can do it. There are a lot of people that can, but you're doing a great job. By the way, what are the kinds of things that you put in place at the Alliance since you've been there in the 5 years?
Well, I was very reluctant to take the job initially, and I had spoken to I was working in the British movement as the chief executive of the apex body for co-ops in the UK, growing cooperatives in the UK, and I was obliged by my board to take up a position in the International Cooperative Alliance. I was a little reluctant because it had a sort of reputation as a bit of a travel shop, like it would travel around the world having great meetings and then nothing else much would happen. And I was a bit reluctant, but they told me I had to, so I did a deal with them that I would join if I could have agreement with them that if we couldn't make it work for cooperatives and for people and for families, work a bit better, then we would leave. And that was the agreement. But when you get into it, you realize that in a global market, a global movement like ours, which is owned by 1 billion of the world's citizens, needs a global voice. So we decided to set around a group of us, including the U.S. representative on our board, including the Canadians who are here where I am now, including UK and some Swedes, and a group of us on the board got together and decided to change it. So I was elected president in 2009 on an agenda of radical change, on an agenda to be a bit more aggressive, which isn't a word you usually associate with cooperatives. But, we've become invisible in the eyes of the decision makers because our businesses, they don't appear on the stock markets. And most politicians, their business reference is the stock markets, the world stock markets. So we don't appear there, so we're invisible to them. So we were very clear, the billion people who've put their lives in some way or another into a cooperative, they need that voice represented. They need the model of enterprise that they believe in represented. So we decided to go for strong global representation and to start breaking through some glass ceilings. You've never seen a co-op business at the G20 making recommendations to the G20, the 20 largest nations in the world, through the Business Council. The Business Council they have is all stock-invested businesses, stock market businesses. This year we managed, after a 3-year campaign, to get a co-op business on there. And we went to Sydney, because it's Australian chairmanship of that group, and the voice of the co-op and mutual businesses, the voice of the billion, as I kept telling them, was heard in those corridors of power for the first time, and we're managing to get some recommendations. Small steps at first, but next year we'll build on it, so that the people we represent can eventually, in a year or two, see some serious reflection of their needs coming through. And that's what we're doing in a whole range of areas, on sustainable development goals, on the Beijing Plus 20 action plan for women, which will be reviewed next year, on a whole range of different issues. We're now getting the co-op voice heard at global level. Now, that's great, because it means co-ops at local level can say to their governments, look, the UN is saying co-ops ought to be part of saving the planet. And in fact, we're mentioned 3 times in the treaty, once for employing for job creation, once for sustainable agriculture, and once for international development. So these are the sort of things that give you tools from the top that the bottom can use.
Boy, you say a mouthful, and it's exciting stuff. Because, as you may know, I came through the NAHC, National Association of Housing Co-ops.
Yeah.
And there's a gentleman by the name of Roger Wilcox, who's 95 years old now, who's sort of created a lot of housing co-ops here in the U.S. in the 50s and 60s. And then the economy, the world changed, the politics changed, the money changed here, and it wasn't money to create. And these were affordable housing co-ops. And he kept saying in a committee, a development preservation committee, if we build them, then people will buy them. So his whole approach was get developers to build them. And after hearing this for 2 years, and I'm going, there's no demand. And coming from a marketing background, it was like, well, you've got to get people to demand them, and people don't know about co-ops. So we've got to promote them first. So we came to this a couple, maybe 3 years before the UN, out of the International Year of the Co-op, was we got to promote co-ops, and that's what I'm hearing you say. And so we had said that in our committee, and we brought that forth, and it's still very difficult though to get it. And I keep looking for reasons, and you've given me one great reason when you talk about the stock market and what people see and how much we are hidden. I kept believing, Pauline, that the reason that we don't see it here is because the 1%ers, those people that have this stock, they don't want us to know about co-ops. They don't want the common person to know about co-ops, because if they did and people got the real benefits of co-ops and how individual people can get off of welfare and own their own businesses, where individual people can get the training they need to have control over their life, where people can see that co-ops are nothing but people helping people, and it's so easy for people, that's what I've learned in this co-op world, to give information away. They don't try to hold it. They try to give it away.
That's such a good thing that you mentioned that, because that's what we're finding here with these 3,000 businesses. People are standing up and talking to people about how they developed a particular model of cooperatives. And mostly people would hold that to themselves and say, I can make money from this model. Yeah. Here, we're saying, go and create these. They're great. They work for communities. And, you're right. I've been all around the world. I've seen co-ops helping very poor Bedouin farmers, sheep farmers in Palestine. I've seen them excited because their business is growing from their basic investment of 400 Israeli shekels in a co-op. It's grown to 7,000 in 3 years, and they're so excited about that. This is real real coming out of poverty for these people, you know. I mean, it means so much. I've seen people in a very deprived part of the Philippines, in Manila, who are just working so hard through the credit union. They built a school so that their members' kids can go to school. They built a nursery so that the women members of their credit union can stick the babies in the nursery and go to get on the job ladder for a few hours a day. You know, these things change lives. That's what it's about, Vernon. That's exactly what it's about. And that's why for me, I got a short, limited term of president of this organization, which is a great privilege. And I want to try and make a difference for those people who are trying to do that work on the bottom by creating the visibility for our model of business at global level, because it'll peter down. If we hit the G20 and get some recommendations in and they start talking about the value of co-ops, very soon that'll come down to the national level, and people will then start implementing programs for co-ops. That's what it's all about.
You know, we have to take another break. I really am enjoying this conversation because I'm learning and I hear your enthusiasm. And we'll be right back. But if anybody want to call in at 1-800-450-7876. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial. You know, Radio One's main motto is information is power. And the National Cooperative Bank is giving you information about co-ops. And what we find, and a gentleman by the name of Papa Sen from Senegal said, information is power when you put energy and action to it. And this is what Dame Pauline Green is talking to us about this morning, is the kinds of energy that she and the Alliance is doing around the world, putting action to information, giving information, which is the fifth principle of the cooperative movement. It is education, training, and information. Giving people information so that they can have the power to control their own lives, their communities, their destiny. Welcome back, Pauline Green.
Thank you very much.
I hear your excitement and your enthusiasm, and it's contagious. Can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that your radical changes are happening with people on the ground in co-ops?
Well, what's happened through the financial crisis and the economic recession, and remember, it's not all over the world, this, because in the emerging countries, you know, there hasn't been the same sort of collapse that you've seen in the US, that we've seen in my country, in the UK, and most of Europe. But where it has happened, all across the world, in fact, what we've seen is the cooperative movement growing. And they've grown because, for instance, in the U.S., there was a lady in California who just tweeted, I think, or put on her Facebook a comment about why should people be in commercial banks and pay this level of interest rate when my credit union is giving me this level of interest rate, which was much better. And that went viral and became a huge campaign to move your money. And millions of accounts on the 5th of November 2011, when we were actually just after we were in New York together, millions of accounts moved across from the commercial banks to the credit unions because people saw that going back to something that was driven by mutuality rather than by the need to red-blooded rush for profitability serves people well. And that's the core thing. So we've seen a growth in our banking sector, in our insurance sector. Our insurance sector in the last 5 years, which is about insuring many, many people that the traditional insurers won't touch because they got no collateral, they got nothing to put up front, but we insure them. And that business has grown from 23% of the world market to 28%. We've now got 1/3 of the world's insurance assets in the hands of co-ops and mutuals. And as a result of that, we've created another 120,000 jobs across the world when everyone else is laying people off. Yeah. And in Spain, where 50% of Spanish youngsters are unemployed, 50%. Can you imagine how damaging that is to a national economy? Well, in the first 3 months of this year alone, the worker co-op sector, that's people who own their own cooperative business, and it can be in any sector of business. It can be manufacturing, it can be press and media, it can be wind energy, but if they own it, it's a worker co-op. And they made 10,000 new jobs in the first 3 months in Spain, which is a smaller country, much smaller than the US, of course. But this is what's been happening in the co-op movement. big growth in community cooperatives. You know, the global market's a great big concept, Vernon. People feel totally detached from it, dislocated from it. But a co-op actually helps you to relocate your environment, your engagement with your local community, helps you to feel a bit more secure and safe. So local cooperatives have become very popular. People buying up clubs, businesses, transport systems together as a community to keep that community live and energetic, and owning it together. In my country, you probably know about the world famous pubs that we have. Well, in some parts of the UK, little villages, the pubs were going out of business. The local villagers came together, bought the pub, and you see the signs. This pub under new management, ours. You know, it's fantastic. That's fantastic. So these are the things that are happening, and it's giving people a sense of well-being in their own community. It's sort of giving them feet and roots in their own community. This is ours. We're going to look after this. We may not be able to impact too much on that global economy up there, but we can sure as heck look after what we're doing down here. So people are taking on childcare, nurseries, providing kindergartens through cooperative ownership, care for the elderly through cooperative ownership, so their old folk don't get pushed off to a town 40 miles away and you have to go and visit them out there. They create their own care for the elderly in their village. These are the things that are happening. It's local people looking after local people.
Chuck Snyder, who will be on next Thursday, is the president of NCB.
I know Chuck Snyder.
Yeah, he said on the program last year, he was on last October also. So we're celebrating our first anniversary this year, and we're glad you're on, Pauline, to help us celebrate 1 year on the radio. That co-ops are nothing but people helping people, and that's what you just described.
Exactly.
But I want to go back and define a co-op for people out there to make sure you understand. A co-op is any business you can think of. And Pauline has showed us all kinds of different businesses around the world that can be co-op. But if it's owned by the employees, that's the employees own it. So it's called a worker co-op. That means that you're your own boss, and the people together come together and decide policies and procedures for the business. And the focus, as she's already said, is on what's best for the stakeholders, what's best for the employees, what's best for the customers. And so that it's not looking for, and this was the whole 2 years at Stanford and the MBA, was what is the return on investment? How do you maximize return on that? That was the total education, not what is best for the individuals that work in the business or what's best for the employees, the customer. So the other type of co-op is when it's owned by the people that use the products or services. That's like right. A housing co-op.
Consumer, retail.
Credit unions, retail. Yeah. The credit unions are owned by the people that put their money in, that make their deposits and have their checking accounts, and therefore the people on the boards are looking for what's best for the customer. Total difference, and which Pauline has already talked about in different parts of the world. I just really don't get in the U.S. that we've had this huge increase from 23% to 28% in this time frame. Do you have a sense of what's happening in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world in terms of the growth of co-ops?
Well, you know, there's a pretty big co-op movement in the U.S. The credit union movement, which are financial cooperatives, is obviously huge. Mm-hmm. And many, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I know there's a large percentage of Americans have credit union accounts. When we were in a seminar in the White House in 2012, and one of the senior Obama staff there, we said, well, I'm not. We asked him, are you a member of a co-op? He said, no, I'm not a member of a co-op. But are you a member of a credit union? Oh, yeah, I'm a member of a credit union. Well, that's a financial cooperative. Yeah, this is the level of lack of knowledge, because it's not taught in schools these days. It's not taught in colleges, and we're on that game as well. We're now trying to drive up knowledge and build some proper MBA courses that have cooperative business in their curriculum. We have to do that. It's a critical part of what we're trying to do in raising the profile. So and you've got these huge electric co-ops across the U.S. Something like 80% of the landmass of the U.S. is covered by electric co-ops.
They're called rural electric co-ops.
Rural electric co-ops, and I've been to speak at their AGM, and they're bringing together 6,000 or 7,000 people from across the U.S., members who own the cooperatives. So you're talking about the co-op movement is very big business in some respects. Our largest 300 cooperatives, just 300, and we got 2.5 million across the world. But our largest 300 are worth $2.2 trillion US. So that's big business. That's just the tiny pinnacle, of course. The great swell of them underneath, the great multitude of them, are much, much smaller and much more community-based. But nevertheless, we know how to run big business as well as looking after communities. So I think it's in the U.S., when we were in that Obama administration seminar in 2012, they were talking a lot about housing co-ops and how they can meet the housing need. And I think that work's still continuing. And there was some work on the Obama healthcare initiatives that were related to the co-op movement. So I think there is certainly growth in the U.S. cooperative movement. There's no question about that.
Okay. I was in that room with you. There's 150 of us cooperators at the White House. And the person after, I won't say his name.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do either.
Embarrassing. But he belonged to two. His family belonged to two credit unions, not just one. Okay. And that is talking about the lack of knowledge about co-ops and how much we have to do. And you just educated me about the growth. And I didn't know that there was that many people in rural electric. And Martin Lowry.
He's great.
Yes, he'll be on the program, I think, the last week of this month. He's with the rural electric co-ops.
He is. He's on the board of the International Cooperative Alliance, too, and doing a fantastic job as the U.S. representative, I must say.
Okay, I didn't know that part about him, but he is fascinating. You know, he has a PhD in philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's nice
I tell you, he plays a mean guitar, too.
Oh, okay.
I've seen him playing at a rural electrics meeting. He's great.
There is so much to talk about. From the future, well, I tell you what I want to do real quick, which I like to do is talk about the principles. The first principle of modern co-op, which Pauline said was in 1844 in Rochdale, England, and that was volunteer and open membership. And I like that being an African American. It's volunteer and open. It doesn't matter gender,
exactly.
Race. It doesn't make any difference. The second one is democratic member control, and this is the people that our members vote, and they
one member, one vote.
One member, one vote, and then members' economic participation that they have to put in some money. Housing co-op is when they pay their rent, if you will, and autonomy and independence. That they have
just
to
a minute,
be
Vernon, on the principle about an economic return to members. It's not just about. Because we also give money back to the members, and it's based on the old principle of corporation. You don't get money back on your shareholding. You get money back on how much you trade with the co-op. Because the old philosophy is, if we've got money left in the co-op at the end of the year, we've charged you too much for your goods. So they obviously put money in investment to their own business. They give some money to the community, but then they give the rest back to the members.
So it works, the participation of economics works both ways. You put in, and then you get back, and you get back based on how much you put in.
Exactly.
You know, the time is almost up. We have one more segment to go. We have to step away again for another break. This is fascinating. I have a lot more to talk about. We'll finish these principles when we get back. But please do not touch the dial. If you want to call in at 1-800-450-7876. We have Dame Pauline Green, who's the president of International Cooperative Alliance, talking about co-ops around the world. Thank you. We'll be right back.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Welcome back, everybody. National Co-op Bank sponsors this program, telling you about the benefits of co-ops. We have Dame Pauline Green on the line with us this morning from Quebec, Canada. She's out of the UK and president of the International Cooperative Alliance. NCB's customers are cooperatives such as grocery stores, purchasing co-ops, housing co-ops. Other customers share in the spirit of cooperation driven by democratic organizing principles. They may be Alaskan and Native American enterprises, which by their very nature are member-run and member-owned. And, you know, anybody that have these principles, we're talking about the members' economic participation before we took a break, that the members put money in. They also get money back if there's extra monies, and the board of directors and the members will make those decisions. The fourth principle is autonomy and independence. And that one is that the members have to be the ones that are running the business. You cannot have banks or whoever loaned them the money or anybody else making
or governments, importantly. In some parts of the world, that's a problem.
that the governments are trying to make the decisions for the
Yeah, there's
cooperative?
traditionally a history of government interference in Africa in particular. Slowly that's changing now, much to my relief, and governments are actually helping to form cooperatives and then stepping back and letting the members run it themselves, which is great, and it's a testament to a new breed of leader in Africa.
You know, and Papa Sin, I mentioned him earlier, it was on the program from Senegal, and he said one of the things that he learned is that people that help to create these co-ops have to have the patience and the wisdom to let the people choose how to solve their own problems. You have to let them solve their own problems.
Yeah.
Education, training, and information is the fifth one, and this is my favorite of them all, and why I first liked co-ops is that you have to give them the knowledge. Pauline, I've taught for 12 years in my career, and education is so, so important.
Absolutely.
And number 6 is cooperation among cooperatives. Do you see much of it happening around the world?
Yeah, increasingly amongst big, small, medium size, there is a desire to work with other cooperatives. I think it's because we recognize kindred spirits. We feel comfortable working with others. We try not to exploit our supply chains, and we try to secure better working conditions. It's been very important over the last 5-6 years of the financial crisis. In Europe in particular, many cooperatives have taken voluntary cuts in their salaries in order to keep people employed. So they haven't allowed staff to be laid off. In Spain in particular, they were in double-digit figures, reducing their salaries for 3 or 4 years in a row to keep staff. Now, that's pretty much something again, I think, and it requires a lot of real community spirit to do that. So, but this is all part of what cooperatives are and do, and working together. The cooperation amongst cooperatives is not just about business to business, although it is that. It's also about working together to build more cooperatives, and that's why people join things like the International Cooperative Alliance. They're prepared to support us, to help us get the right conditions to grow cooperatives in other parts of the world.
And I've heard of housing co-ops. In one case here in the U.S., they put their money together. They have reserves that they put together for future replacement of roofs and so forth, called replacement reserves. And they've used some of those to help a grocery store get started or other co-ops get started.
Exactly. Oh, that's absolutely right. That is what happens. And, you know, the U.S. electric co-ops, the ones we were talking about earlier, they have done a fantastic job developing electric co-ops all over South America, and most recently in Bangladesh, the place taking electricity to villages in Bangladesh for the very first time, spending time training the villagers to run the cooperative, how they maintain the infrastructure. And I was talking to Martin Lowry, who you're having on soon, and he was telling me that they might spend between 2 and 5 years going back to the same village, training, retraining, bringing new villagers on, so that the electric co-op is secure in their hands. And I think, you know, that's what cooperatives do. You know, a lot of Swedish co-ops are in parts of South Asia, building housing co-ops. My own country, we've been in Africa building fair trade co-ops to source goods from. This is what we do. This is what we do.
And Martin and a group of U.S. cooperators went to Cuba recently.
Yeah, they did. Martin gave our board a great report on that visit to Cuba. And, you know, the Cubans are trying to develop a cooperative economy to take over from their sort of their state-controlled or one-party state economy as it is at the moment. So they're looking at an entirely new model of economic behavior. And, wow, that would be something.
Fascinating. And the seventh principle is concern for community. And this one you've already talked about. You have a co-op that sells fertilizer, and then they're going to help their farmers create organic, so they don't need a fertilizer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Did you get it any clearer than that? There's also a huge growth, actually, Vernon, in energy cooperatives. I mean, in Germany, for instance, they're trying to move away from nuclear power, so they have decentralized their government funding to allow communities to build their own infrastructure for creating energy. Many of those are owned as cooperatives in the villages. It's a fantastic story. They're aiming to have 80% of their energy supplies created by community-based businesses, and as I say, mostly they're cooperatives. So wind turbines, solar panels, all this stuff being driven by cooperatives. So it's pretty impressive.
Oh, I would like to know more about that one. But there's another thread on everybody I've had on in this show in the last year. Everybody to a person. But let me ask you the question: do you like your work?
Oh, I love it.
Why?
Because every day, it's great to get up. I mean, can you imagine being here with 3,000 people who are all talking about how they can make the world a better place? I mean, I've got 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and I don't like what I'm seeing in the world. I don't like what I'm seeing in the Middle East, in parts of in the Ukraine. I don't like this stuff. I grew up through the Cold War. I don't want to see my children having to be, and my grandchildren having to be involved in that sort of stuff. So I'm here with 3,000 inspirational people who are trying to build a better world. And that's, it's great joy to get up and do that each day.
Well, that's the same thing I've heard from everybody on this show, is that they love their work. So the other part of it, do your children know what you're doing, and what do they think about you and what you do?
Oh, well, my kids, they keep me down to earth. And I've always said to them, if you think I'm getting too big for my boots, just give me a kick in the shins. And they're great. And my grandchildren are my joy. They're the future. I look at them and I think, wow. And 3 of them are girls, and I keep telling them, this is your century, girls. You can do just what you like. And then I've got a really naughty little but beautiful, gorgeous, loving little grandson. And, they're what I live for, really. And they're what I'm trying to build a better world for. And I'm sure that's the same with every other person. Nobody ever said to you on their deathbed, I wish I'd worked harder in the office.
Okay.
Nobody. So,
I just turned 67 on Tuesday of this week.
I'm close behind you.
Oh, I didn't think so. I was going to say I started to start off by saying I've got this young lady. You don't look at it.
No, 66.
Okay. And it wasn't until in the last 5 years I've known what it is I want to do for the rest of my life. When people used to ask me as a kid, what do you want to do? I would always shrug my shoulders. But now I want to promote co-ops, develop some housing co-ops. I want to see if we can I want to create either a 2-year that may go into a 4-year college that teaches cooperation, cooperatives, and all of the things that goes along the philosophy of it, everything about co-ops, why they work. And the 4th thing I want to do is to figure out how to get ICA and the Federation of Southern Co-ops some more money to do the things that you do.
Oh, you're a great man. Amen to that, Vernon. You're lovely.
I've talked to 2 people. One is a gentleman by the name of Mark Levitt from Cummins Engine Company. I called him for the Federation of Southern Co-ops, but he said that they're doing things around the world, and I want to hook you all up or whoever in your organization with them. Cummins I worked for 10 years, and Jim Joseph, who I talked to you about earlier, was the VP of Social Responsibility. He went to be the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. We both worked there. It's a great place. They have a lot. They do give a lot of their money, the profit back. So I want to see about hooking you guys up. So he said they are looking for partners around the world. And the other one is I've just spoke to the dean of Stanford. Stanford got $150 million donated to them to end poverty around the world.
Oh.
And I really want to see if I can hook you all up with the group because they're going now and developing an infrastructure where you already have it.
Well, that's true, and this is one of the great attractions of the co-op movement. We're now working with the European Development Fund because we already have a network of people who we rely on. They have the same aspirations as us. We don't have to build an infrastructure when we go to these places. It's already there, and so we're a good bet, actually.
Well, a part of what you do is to end poverty. I think you said it earlier, right? That's
completely, yeah.
And what have you found best to end poverty? I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Well, it's to help people help themselves. For instance, there's going to be 9 to 10 billion people on this planet by 2050 and not enough agriculturally productive land to feed them. We have enough land now. We just don't have the political will. But by 2050, we're going to have a food security problem of major proportions. So we believe, 73% of the land that could be more productive is in sub-Saharan Africa. We want to build an agriculturally cooperative economy in sub-Saharan Africa because not only will that help feed the world and feed Africa, but it'll keep the wealth that's generated by that growth in the hands of the African farmers, not in the shareholdings of multinational businesses somewhere else in the world and not in the hands of predatory states. That's the sort of agenda we have.
Hey, fantastic. Okay. We figure out how we can shout this all over the world.
You're doing a good job at that, Vernon. Thank you.
You are, too. You know, it's only 1 minute left. Any other comment you want to make to the people out there and to me?
I just want to say to people that, there is hope for a better world, and it's been a very tough time in the last few years. But I believe that the world is ready for a different sort of business. I think people are crying out for something they can engage in. When you saw the Occupy Wall Street kids, they were looking for the way their voice could be heard. They could have an impact. That's what's out there. Cooperatives are out there. You just got to get out there and join them, and we'll help you to build this better world.
How do they reach out to you?
Through their local co-ops. There's plenty in the U.S.
So go through the local co-ops in the U.S., and one place to go here is www.ncba.coop.
That's it.
And they are the ones that combine the co-ops here and work with the co-ops in the U.S. And there's just a lot of different places to go to. Pauline, I thank you so very much for being on today and for taking out your time. I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate it. And
thanks to the National Cooperative Bank and Chuck Snyder. Pass my thanks on.
I will do that.
They're doing a great job.
And Chuck will be on next Thursday. Thank everybody for
Give him my best.
On.
Thanks.
I will. Have a great day. Bye now.
Bye.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.